Hi and welcome to this video, which is the Backup Module Advanced Topics. So I would recommend that you first listen to the Basics Backup Module because that tells you how to configure a backup plan, do a backup, how the backup index works, how to restore. So in this video we're going to cover some of the more advanced and sophisticated things you can do with a backup plan. So my Archiware configuration currently contains a couple of clients, a disk storage library, a pool for both backup and archive, and because we've run some backups previously, there's some data on my first disk backup volume. I'm using a disk library because it's kind of quicker and simpler to show you that rather than using physical tape. My disk library is located on the desktop in this folder, and you can see my first backup volume, which relates to this ID over here, has nearly a megabyte's worth of data on it. So now we find ourselves looking at the backup plan that we previously configured, and the first thing I want to show you is the concept of alternating backup. Remember that currently we have one backup disk pool, and we created two events, an incremental and a full backup, and down here you would have noticed previously that there's a plus button and there's an info button against the target pools, and the tooltip here tells us that this feature is deliberately to allow on-site and off-site backups to be more easily created. So the general concept here is that we're doing a backup to tape, and we want to have more than one independent pool of tapes so that we can have a set of tapes on-site in the company's offices, let's say, and a completely separate set off-site, and maybe even three sets, so that one set can be in transit on its way between the off-site location and on-site, while at the same time there's a set on-site and there's a set off-site. So the idea is this means that you can that a company can endure a fire or a flood or something that might otherwise damage tapes on-site, and still have a set of tapes off-site that they can bring back into the building and recover all their data from some recent point in time. So in order to do this, you need to have more than one pool, and then you need to specify more than one pool in each backup event. So at the moment in this configuration, we've currently only got one backup pool, backup disk. So what we're going to do first is create a second pool, and we'll call this pool backup disk 2 to differentiate it from the first pool. It's going to be used for backup, but it's not going to be used for tape, it's going to be used for disk, and we'll apply and close that. So now we have our two pools, but only the first pool has any volumes in it, the second pool has none. That said, we've only got 8 labeled volumes at the moment, and I believe the storage manager that we configured has 10 slots in it. So we can still label 2 volumes in this library. So let's do that now. So I'm going to highlight the disk library, click on the label button down at the bottom, and you'll see slots 9 and 10 currently are unlabeled, but there's a possibility to create volumes in those slots. So we're going to choose our backup disk 2 pool and label and confirm that's what we want to do, and that job won't run for very long. You can see it's completed down at the bottom here. So the net result of that is that there are now 2 volumes in our backup disk 2 pool, and under volumes, those 2 at the bottom are the 2 that we just created. So although we have 4 volumes in the first pool and 2 in the second, so ultimately we'd probably want to make both pools the same size, this will allow us to configure our backup events over here such that we can implement an on-site and off-site workflow. So currently we've got a simple backup workflow here where we do incremental backups on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, and then we do a full backup on Friday. And currently each of these events is looking to write to a pool called backup disk. So it's looking for volumes in that pool to be available whenever it runs. Now, if we take these 2 events here and we add the second pool, so I'm going to click the plus button and choose the backup disk 2 pool and apply that, and do exactly the same thing over here with the other job, with the other backup event. So now you see that the target pool has got both pools listed. So now the job will behave differently. What will happen is when each of these events runs, it will first look to see if there are any volumes in the backup disk pool available to use. And if there are none available currently, then we will look for volumes in the backup disk 2 pool, the alternate pool. And if there are any volumes available, then we will write to those volumes. Now, what the special thing that happens here is that the two pools of tapes are maintained independently of each other. So this means that there is no interplay between the two pools regarding what data gets written where. So each pool is written to such that it contains its own copy of all the data to be backed up. So that means that if you're doing incremental backups Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you're swapping these two pools around each day, then if the backup disk pool, this first pool here, is first seen on a Monday, and then it's next seen on Wednesday, because on Tuesday this other pool was made available in the library, then on Wednesday 2 days worth of changes will be saved to the backup disk pool, because Archiware knows that this pool hasn't been written for 2 days and therefore needs to be updated with 2 days worth of changes. So you see that each pool will be updated ultimately with all the changes occurring on the file system, such that if you come to need to restore your entire server just from the backup disk 2 pool, then all the data will be in that pool up to the last point that it was written. So this makes it pretty easy to rotate different pools of tapes within a single backup schedule, within a single backup plan. And it's actually possible to have up to 3 pools, so you can accommodate that on-site, off-site and in-transit kind of workflow that I mentioned slightly earlier. And just to reiterate, as it says if you click the information button, feature allows up to 3 pools to be alternated, and P5 will use the first pool that has available volumes. So that means that it will go through these pools in order, and the first volume it finds, it will use that pool. So that means that in order for backup disk 2 pool to be used, there would have to be no volumes in the backup disk pool available. Otherwise we'll use that pool. So if there was just 1 volume available in the backup disk pool, and that volume was almost full and didn't have enough space to accommodate today's incremental backup, we would still write that volume, because there would have to be no volumes available in that pool in order for us to use the other pool. And as I explained earlier, the last sentence here says, when performing incremental backups, all data will be added to the pool since it was last used, creating a complete backup on the pool. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Let's close that down. Actually, in order to avoid problems, I'm just going to remove the second pool from each of these backup events, so we have the same configuration that we started with. So that's alternating backups, and that's how we easily create on-site, off-site workflows. Next, let's look at progressive backup. So let's revisit the backup plan that we were configuring and go to additional options. Now, in the basics backup video, I talked about the retention period, and I drew a diagram showing how backups proceed, how you normally repeat full backups over some period of time so that your data gets resaved in its entirety onto your pool of volumes, so that volumes can be recycled according to the retained data period that you set. So that should be clear to you at this point in order to understand how progressive backup works. So progressive backup removes the need for you to schedule full backups in your backup plan, and it just uses the retained data for X days period to work out when it needs to start resaving data automatically for you to allow the oldest volumes in your workflow, in your backup cycle, to be recycled automatically. So what it's saying is that if you specify that you want to retain data for 28 days, then Archiware will look at volumes where the data is older than 28 days, and it will allow those volumes to be recycled by saving any files that exist on those volumes that are still on the file system that you're backing up as part of your daily incremental backups. So the idea is that you just run daily incremental backups, and Archiware will look after the recycling and the resaving of data without you having to schedule full backups in your backup plan. So those are the words. Let's just let me just try and illustrate this in a bit more detail with a bit more clarity perhaps by doing some scribbling. So we're talking about progressive backup. So as with any kind of backup, we've got volumes. We've got a succession of volumes available, either tape or disk, in our library device that we are going to be backing up to over time. So we're going to start with the first one and proceed. Now, ordinarily, you schedule a full backup which runs first, and then over some period of time you repeat that full backup whilst running incremental backups in the intervening days, like so. And by doing that, you're creating backup cycles here and here, where the incrementals are dependent on the full which runs before them. And by repeating full backups over time, it's possible to then recycle the tapes that are prior to that full backup to allow them to be used over here for subsequent backups. So how does progressive backup change things? Well, let's just undo a few of those changes to my diagram. With progressive backup, we still have to begin with a full backup because the index is always empty to begin with and needs to be populated with all the data that we're backing up. But after that, you continue with your incremental backups moving forward. And everything will proceed as normal up to the point where the retention period is reached. So let's say you have a 28-day retention period set on the backup plan. So when you get to 28 days, the first volume over here will contain data which is 28 days old, and as you move past the 28-day point, the data on that tape will be older than 28 days, and therefore, according to what's been configured in the backup plan, we no longer need to allow that data to be restored because it's older than 28 days. So what happens is Archiware will begin to resave the files and folders from this tape over here, because the tape has been nominated as a recyclable volume. So in order to allow this volume to be recycled, additional files will be saved over here as part of the incremental backup which is running on that day. So your incremental backups, as well as saving the changes on the file system, which is normally what incremental backups do, they additionally get to save files from old volumes which are waiting to be recycled. And once all of the files from a volume over here which is set as recyclable have been resaved as part of an incremental backup, or maybe as part of several incremental backups, then the tape can be recycled and made available over here as a new volume for the backup to continue to use. So progressive backup just takes the retention period that's been configured in the backup plan and automates the process of allowing volumes to be recycled by resaving to subsequent volumes files which need to be kept that are on those old volumes. Okay, so I hope that's clear. So all that you need to do to enable progressive backup is just tick this other radio button down here and make sure that your retention period is set correctly. Great. So finally, in this video I'm going to show you how to perform a bare metal recovery. So what a bare metal recovery is where a customer has been backing up their critical business servers using Archiware's backup module. They've had some kind of a catastrophic event, they've had a flood or a fire, and all of their existing IT infrastructure has been destroyed. They're left with a set of tapes containing an up-to-date backup, and they need to rebuild their IT infrastructure using the backup. So this means that we start off with bare metal. We purchase new servers and new storage, new tape library, and then we take the tapes and we're going to try and recover everything from those tapes. So we can recreate this scenario here using our disk library. Our disk library contains our virtual set of tapes, and the first thing we need to do when we're in a position of making a bare metal recovery is to know which volume Archiware wrote last. So in order to make sure that we've got an up-to-date backup, I'm just going to go into this training backup, and I'm going to run an incremental backup and just monitor that and make sure that that job completes successfully. And then I know which volume has last been written within my stack of volumes here, and I can use that volume to recover the most up-to-date snapshot of Archiware's entire configuration. So let me just explain a little bit more before we go any further in the UI about what is saved on tape to facilitate the bare metal recovery, and then which steps are required to recover those things from tape and in what order. And then we'll come back into the product again and we'll go through the process and you'll see how we recover everything. So as you know, Archiware is installed in a directory by default on a Mac and on the Linux OS at user local AW. On Windows we're stored in on the C drive under program files and then Archiware and then a folder called Press Store. So that's where you need to look on Windows to find the same things that we're going to talk about now. And within either of those directories there's a directory called config, and this is where everything that changes as your installation of Archiware evolves. This is where all of the databases and the configuration live. And within this folder there's a folder called customer config, and there's also a folder called index. And these are the two critical folders. The first folder here contains all of the settings that you've made in order to take your fresh installation of Archiware through to the running installation that you currently have. So that means putting in a license, that goes in the customer configuration, creating backup plans, labeling volumes, all the volumes that the product knows about, all of the statistics about when those volumes were last written, all of that stuff lives in the customer config. And basically the customer config contains everything except the indexes, and the indexes are the databases that contain all of the files that have been backed up over many backup runs over many days, potentially over millions of files. So the index is a database which is going to be potentially quite large, especially if your installation has been running for a while, whereas the customer configuration is relatively small because it doesn't keep growing and growing as you add more backups. It remains pretty static in size, and it just contains the settings basically within the product and not all information about the data that's being backed up. So you've got these two different databases. Now it's worth noting at this point that bare metal recovery only applies to backup, so this only works for the backup module. If you're looking to recover your archive indexes following a disaster, then you need to make sure that you were backing those up using the backup product in the first place. So let's just have a think about how Archiware stores extra information to allow a bare metal recovery to take place. So think of this strip that I'm drawing here as the tape, where a tape is the sequential device, and when it's first written we write a header at the beginning of a tape. The same applies to the way that we write volume files on disk, but we can only write either the volume file or the tape volume sequentially starting at the beginning. So when a tape is first labeled, we write a header on the beginning of the tape, and then there'll be various jobs that will write data to the tape as the tape is used on different days. So let's say this tape has received 3 incremental backups and there's 3 chunks of data on the tape. So the first thing that we're doing when we're writing backup volumes is we're taking the customer config and we are writing the customer config at regular intervals across the volumes while we're writing the volumes. So these are all customer configs that have been added to the data that's being written to the tape. So this means that at whatever point this tape's finished being written, there will be, towards the end of the tape, a customer config snapshot that is up to date as of that point in time. So the first step when doing a bare metal recovery is to have the product pull back this customer config and pull back the last one from the most recently written tape, and thereby giving us a restored customer configuration from that tape which is up to date. You don't want to restore a customer config from 2 days prior, because all of the stats about which volumes have been written and so on will be inaccurate. Volumes may be recycled, and an old customer config will contain volumes which have subsequently been recycled and no longer exist. So it's important to recover a recent customer config. So the customer config goes directly onto the tape in its entirety, and that's easy to recover once you know which tape it's on. The index is different, because the index is a big monolithic database that gets added to each time a job runs. So what we do with the index is that we run an additional job after each backup, where we write the portion of the index that's been created by the backup that just ran, the data that was saved here, onto the tape directly. And so these indexes will exist at the position on the tape where jobs ended and the index was dumped onto the tape. And the location of each of these index chunks that is being written to the tape is actually stored back in the customer configuration. So part of this customer config contains the index locations on the tape. So once you've got your configuration, your customer configuration back, we know about all of these tapes down here that have indexes on them, and we know the positions of these indexes on the tapes as well. So we can quickly read all of this stuff back and rebuild the indexes by reading all the tapes. So just to summarize, it's a two-step process. First of all, the customer configuration is recovered from the last written tape, and then that allows us, with knowledge of all the volumes that Archiware had written up to that point, to go and locate each of these chunks of index from the tape and recover those, and thereby rebuild the index databases on disk. And once that's all done, Archiware is back to a point where all of the data can be recovered from the indexes back to disk. So you can basically recover all of your live data back to your newly purchased storage that you've bought to replace the damaged storage. So how do we do this in the actual web interface with a real product? Well, there was a backup that we just ran, and you can see the backup from 17th of June running at 12:30 here. And if I click on one of these backup events, you can see the where the volume that this job wrote to is listed. You can see the config was written to this block number on the tape. So when I say tape, obviously it's an interchangeable word, it can mean disk. So that means that this volume 10,001 here, at this position within the volume, we have a copy of our configuration. So I now know that that's the last volume that was written. And if I didn't have the web interface to go in here and look at, I would be relying on knowing which was the last volume that had been written by having these job logs being emailed to me by Archiware, and hopefully those emails would survive whatever the loss was, and I would be able to go and know which was the last tape written. So in order to show you how to recover this copy of Archiware, I'm going to first of all remove this copy of Archiware and then install a fresh copy with no indexes, no configuration, and then we'll recover everything that we have here. So what we have here is a completely fresh installation of P5. So what I'm doing here is recreating the scenario where the machine has been replaced with a new one, and you've installed the product from scratch. And first thing we're going to do is log in as P5 demo, the user for this training. And you can see this is an empty configuration because there's no license. Can't click on any of the modules across the top, it's all grayed out. So let's enter a license so that we can proceed further. So at this point you would enter the key that you purchased. I'm going to use the current demo license, which I've got here in a text file. Whoops. and this license expires in a couple of weeks' time. Apply that, and now we can access all of the menu options. The P5 menu contains the option to restore a configuration. You can actually get to this option without putting a license in, and when you recover your configuration, if it has a valid license in it, then that'll get you past the need to enter a license in manually. Now, restoring an older configuration, it says here, will overwrite the existing one. So make sure that you're happy that the configuration that you're currently running with, and in our case that's a blank empty one with a demo key in it, is something that you're happy to lose. Now, the OS path box needs to be filled in at this point, and the OS path will either be the full path to a disk volume. So in our case, this is going to be easy because I know this is the disk volume that contains my config, and I can just drag and drop that or enter the full path in manually into that field. If I was using a tape drive, then on Solaris Linux and the Mac OS X, the paths that are shown below would need to be copied in between the quotes, copied and pasted into the box above. So different platforms have different ways of specifying the tape device. So this is correct for Solaris, this for Linux, and Archiware creates its own tape device file within its own directory structure on the Mac. By default, Archiware will scan the volume and pick up the last configuration written to the volume, which takes a little bit longer. If you know the block location from your job log of where the last config was written on your tape, and remember tapes are going to be slower to recover from than disk, then by specifying the block number, the drive can be requested to wind the tape out directly to that block number, and will recover the configuration directly from the end of the tape or the location on the tape where it exists, so we don't need to scan through the whole tape looking for it. So all we do now is click the restore button and confirm that that's what we want to do, and then we can monitor that as a job. So if we pull up the job monitor, you'll see that there is a restore config job running, and what happens now is that the configuration is recovered from the volume, and then in order to start running with that new configuration, Archiware is restarted, which is why you've just seen the lost connection to server pop up in the browser. So this indicates to me that the product has now restarted, and what I'll need to do is go back and refresh my browser page and log in again in order to see my recovered configuration. So now you'll see, for example, that there are volumes, pools and a backup plan that would not have been there previously. So these have just been recovered from this volume that we asked Archiware to recover its configuration from. In the case of recovering from tape, obviously you may need to wait some time for the tape to wind out, and a live installation may take more time to restart after the configuration has been recovered. So everything looks as it did before at this point with regards to backup, with the exception that the indexes have not actually been recovered. So it's not going to be possible to browse the backup indexes and see the data that we previously backed up. Remember in the previous video, when we visit the restore area, we can see what we've backed up at this point. But our indexes are currently empty. They haven't been recovered, but everything that needs to be recovered to rebuild these indexes exists on the backup volumes that have been written. Currently that's just this volume here, although we have 4 backup volumes, and I can show you those in the web interface. Although we have 4 backup volumes at the top there, only the first one has received any data. So in actual fact it's only this volume here that we need to see to recover our indexes. So how do we recover indexes? Well, you do it as follows. You go down to Advanced Options and you click on the Manage Indexes button, and then within this list you will need to locate each of your backup indexes. In P5 these start with the name BSX _ and then the name of the client. So I have 2 separate backup indexes here, one for the localhost machine and one for my Mac Mini server, and I need to recover each of these backup indexes separately. So the first step, and let's start with the localhost backup index, is to click the check button bottom right, which will pop up a window, and ordinarily the check index feature is used to check the database, the backup databases, for consistency and repair problems that we might find with them. But it's also used for triggering the recovery of indexes back from volumes. So if I click Start, pretty quickly the index is reported as corrupt. In fact, it doesn't exist, and the volumes required to rebuild this index are listed in this box. So in a real world environment where you might have 40 tapes that you need to recover your indexes from, all 40 of those volumes will be listed here, and you'll need to make sure that you get those volumes online in the library in order for the restore of the index to run okay. So if I hit Start, and then we go to the job monitor again, everything is monitorable via the job monitor, then you can see a recover index for client localhost is running, and it's already completed. And let's go do the same now for our backup index for the Mac Mini server. So we hit check, we start the check, Archiware reports to us which volumes are required. In fact, it's the same volume again. We hit start, and then we can go wait for that job to complete by monitoring the job monitor window. Okay, so we've got both of our recover index jobs completed. You'll notice that the jobs that we'd ran previously to these recover index jobs are not shown. That's because Archiware stores all of its job log information in a separate database, and that is not recovered by the recovering of the customer configuration or the recovery of the backup indexes. So the bare metal recovery does not recover job logs. So let's close the monitor window and now revisit our restore index area for backup. And if we browse the localhost backup index, or indeed the Mac Mini server index, you can now see the users folder and then the folder structure and the files that we had backed up. So that's great. We've now been able to recover our indexes back from the volume that we'd written the backups to. And the final step then would be to recover the data. So let's, by way of an example, recover this preferences folder, hit the restore to button. I would like to recover this folder to P5 desktop, P5 demo, that's the current user that I'm logged in as, their desktop, which is over here. Hit next, and P5 will tell me it needs this, this volume here in order to make this restore work. And then if we monitor the job, you can see the preferences folder already appeared on the desktop, and if we click on it now, we see all of our files. So that could just as well be your entire RAID's worth of data that you've recovered from tape. So that shows you that there is a workflow for doing a bare metal recovery with Archiware. Absolutely necessary that this kind of feature exists in a real world environment. It's pretty straightforward to do what we just did, and the same steps are required when using physical tape libraries to recover first the config and then the indexes back from your tape volumes. So there ends the advanced backup topics video. Hope that was all clear to you. Thanks for watching.